Say after me. You're supposed to put the microphone down for this, but I'm not going to do it. All ready? Say after me. We are going to share amazing stories with the world today. Thank you. That's it. I'm done. Because that's all this is about. We're going to share amazing stories with the world today. I'm going to spend a few minutes trying to share with you some of the ones I've seen. There's just a bunch of stuff that I'm kind of enthusiastic about, so I hope it's a nice start to your day. I'm really, really honored to be here. I don't do much public speaking. There we go, it's over here. Alrighty, beyond global. The idea of today is to go beyond measure, and I chose a title which is Beyond Global. And I've chosen a title Beyond Global because when I was young, I joined the advertising industry as it was globalizing, right? As it was globalizing. And so I used that opportunity to travel the world. So I like globalization. It's taken me to all these kind of amazing places. But in the last couple of years, I've realized that we're coming to the end of that kind of globalization. Globalization is actually just the description of an economy. It's not the description of your world, right? Your world is your own personal world. Your world is made up of people that you know. So beyond global to me is beyond this idea of a single global economy defining absolutely everything, and to a world which is your own. And there's going to be lots of really amazing opportunities for you to create that world around your own interests and your own beliefs and your own power. So talking of that, there are some people who are already doing it. I love this photograph. I remember coming across this photograph and just going, who took that photograph? Isn't that great? Isn't that great? Wasn't on Fox News. The demographic median age of Fox News is 70, by the way, so they're not watching this either. This was taken by Terrell Jermaine Starr, and I want to call him out. The brilliant thing about the internet is he may very well hear me call him out, because he could very well be tuning in. I have never met Terrell. I don't know him at all. But what I do know is when I was interested in finding out about the Occupy Wall Street movement, this was the image that blew me away. I love this image. He's a young photographer, young storyteller. He's from Detroit, lives in New York, is telling the story of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Pretty amazing guy. And one of an entire class of young people around the world who are doing exactly this kind of work, who are training, they're going to college, they're learning, they're becoming photographers, they're becoming storytellers, and they're transforming the way we think about the world. The world is about stories. When you change the stories, the world changes. I'm going to invite you today to think about that and realize that your job after this meeting is to start participating in that world and start telling your own stories, but more importantly, from my point of view, listening to the other stories that are out there in the world and then sharing them. This is a photographer from Mongolia. He's called A. Yin. I met him a couple of years ago. Really another remarkable guy. The picture on the left is the same girl as the picture on the right. 4 years apart. I think it's like 2006 to 2010. So in that one diptych, there are quite a few in this series. If you go and find his work, you see the story of a life being completely and absolutely transformed. Beyond, I mean, if you think of your last 4 years, and then imagine the transformation occurring for this young person in Mongolia, you get a sense of really what's going on. She's moving from a nomadic existence to an urban existence. We heard some data earlier on, so 7 billion of us now, this is good. It will slow down, don't worry, because when we move into cities, we have less children, because women don't like having 7 children. They would prefer to have 2. And they do that when they go into cities. See all the women left, I'm right. I'm right. Anyway, in 2006, over half of us began to live in cities, right? So let's do the math. That's about 3.5 billion people now live in cities. You know, within a few years, maybe 7.5 billion of us, of whom 5 billion will live in cities. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there were about 1.1 billion people on the internet. Today, there are about 2.2 billion. In a few years, it'll be about 3, 4 billion, whatever it is. So they'll be in cities, they'll be on the internet. There are 300 million Americans, I think. There are 400 million Europeans. Get the message. We're the minority. We're the minority. So the stories that are being told about the world are changing. And they're going to be told not simply by the people who've been telling them through broadcast television for the last 50 years or 40 years, but they're going to be told by everybody else in the world. And that's going to change the way you think. It's going to change politics. It's going to change business. It's going to change everything. And it's going to be pretty confusing. Look over here. Here's another photograph by A. Yin. Same thing. Young boy on the left living in a yurt or a ger. Young boy on the right in a school built by the Chinese. If you go and have a look at Google and you Google Lagos, you'll see all manner of horrible photographs. People starving, thin people. There's a lot of stories out of Lagos about oil spills, things like that. I met a young photographer in the line. We were stuck in Tokyo after that earthquake, and I met this amazing guy. And he described the briefs that he would get from Western media companies as poverty porn, right? Poverty porn. He was a young guy trying to make his way as a storyteller, as a filmmaker. And whenever he got a brief, it was to film the sad, the miserable, because the people who were briefing them were from our world. They were from the capitalist, dominant world. And they have a narrative of up, down, yes, no, have not, things like that. So when they thought about the Philippines, they thought about have not. And so what they would do would ask him to make films about the have-nots, and he was making amazing films. This is Akintudi Akinleye. He's from Lagos, Nigeria, and as you can see, he tells stories which are beyond the ones which you normally hear from Lagos, Nigeria. So after this, write the name down, go on the internet, find his work, and begin to engage with the real life of real people, in this case, Lagos in Nigeria. As Nancy was saying, we are connected by our humanity. And our humanity really shows out in the work of this young photographer. Here's another one. I love this image. On my monitor, it's been stretched unpleasantly, so I hope she never sees that. But her name is Farzana Wahidi, and this is her work from Kabul, Afghanistan. And again, if you watch mainstream media here in the West, or if you engage with the stories about Afghanistan, you're not hearing the rich, deep story of the real people of Afghanistan, in which case you don't really understand, right? So here's a young woman taking photographs of people around her in Kabul, Afghanistan, and it tells a very, very different story. It's a beautiful story, in fact. It's not denying all the other things that are occurring in Afghanistan, but it kind of contextualizes it. The stories that we need to engage with are no longer the simple stories that are favored by television. They're the complex stories, which we all actually favor. We're very skilled at decoding very complicated stories. We've been doing it all our lives. Television makes things simple. In this new world where you, through social media and the internet, have access to all these stories, is complicated, but it's great. Farzana Wahidi, again, you can find her on the internet, you can look at her work, and if you were really brilliant, you'd buy some of it. Some more of her work, Beauty in Kabul, and social commentary. So I work with a whole bunch of amazing people, and I thought I'd give them a quick shout out, because what happens when you get folk like this together and use this kind of work, you begin to develop a broader, deeper understanding of the world. So I work with a guy called Chris Rainier. He's from National Geographic. He's a photographer, and he runs a festival called the All Roads Festival. He founded that festival, and it brings photographers from indigenous peoples all over the world to show their work to the likes of you and I. It's a community of storytellers who are really painting a different picture of the world than the one that you're familiar with. I work with Joshua and Tiffany, and they're an art director and writer team who run a magazine called Plasm. A couple of you in the audience may know of Plasm. And then there's me and Kelly, who does all our production. And very importantly, we work with an organization out of Dhaka, Bangladesh, called Majority World. A lot of this inspiration comes from a gentleman called Shahidul Alam. And he made this observation at a speech in Stanford I attended just before I left my fancy job in Cupertino. And he pointed out that I was in the minority and that he was beginning to work with majority world photographers, and that these folks were really telling the story of the world as it is, right? So I was very excited by that, and this was one of the reasons I decided to leave my job and begin doing more exploring. So we work with photographers such as Marcala Taboda, I'm sorry. from Mexico, again, telling stories of humanity. Nusha Tavalkan, I've got a dry mouth. Nusha Tavalkan from Iran. Now, Nusha is amazing. Nusha has actually been barred from her own country for taking photographs that you would normally take of your friends and neighbors, right? But this is a young female photographer now based out of Paris. And she's doing really, really, really beautiful work. She once took, I think it was Tom Brokaw, through Tehran. She documents the lives of young women, and so she would do really, really, really outrageous things like photograph young women by swimming pools. Can you imagine that? Really dramatically dangerous things in Iran. But again, look at the life and the vitality and the story that she's telling us through this photograph. It's a beautiful, beautiful image, and it's a great story. So Nusha is somebody else who is working really hard to get these stories out to you so you can see something other than the story that is being sold to you by the mainstream media. Available to you, just Google her name. Now we're in Pablo Corral Vega's territory in rural America, where he depicts kind of young people's lives there. Once again in Brazil, one of the interesting things that I come across in my work is a lot of the people I work with sit in large American or European, or increasingly for me, Korean corporations. And they have this kind of narrative, particularly the Americans, about how awful and weird and strange and distressing the world is. You know, and they go home and like we live in Oregon and it's like 10% unemployment and all these terrible things are going on. And there's kind of wars breaking out all over the world. And so there's a kind of narrative of fear and horror which dominates the way a lot of people are thinking. But if you go to Brazil, or I did, I went to Dhaka, Bangladesh, went into the slums there and out to the villages. That is not the dominant narrative. It is not the dominant narrative. It is a narrative. It's not the dominant narrative. Here, there's a photographer, and he's representing the joy and delight of being Brazilian. If you get on the phone to Brazilians, they're not going, oh my God, life's terrible. I'm really worried about my college education for my children, right? They're going, you know, life is great. We're in this fantastic economy. It's booming. We're not being shot on the streets anymore. So around the world, there is a lot of powerful, strong, wonderful emotions which balance the kind of negativity that you get in the West these days. Those of you who travel extensively know that the most depressing thing to do is to fly into the United States right now. It's like this kind of, oh, dear God, I forgot the world's really, really miserable. It's one of the reasons I have to go, right? It's one of the reasons I have to go. I love this image. This is obviously from Australia. See, I no longer have to even talk about them, right? This is a question a lot of people I meet ask of me. Who are you? What's that shirt you're wearing? I went into a birthing unit in Dakar. And you know, when these folk come in from the villages, they lose a lot of their extended family. And so the act of having a child becomes really quite risky. And so they have a lot of volunteerism, a lot of community kind of behavior. And this is a great example of that. This is looking after, obviously, a pregnant woman. What's particularly noticeable about this is the untouchable community in Mumbai, India, obviously being touched, right? Many, many people. This is who I am. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, was very alarmed by globalization. She felt that we were becoming a single, homogeneous, rather dreary kind of monoculture. Again, a very Western perspective. If you think that globalization is about, you know, everybody wearing Nikes and drinking Coca-Cola, using iPhones. But in fact, what's happening in the global economy is people's voices are now coming to everybody. It's the opposite of homogenization. You travel to every far corner of the earth, you find people adopting technology as quickly as they can, not to become like us, but to be like themselves, to connect to their own stories and present them in the world in an exciting and dramatic way. They want us to understand them. This is in Jerusalem, I believe. Views from the Middle East. Looks familiar. Weddings all over the world. There's a lot of very interesting work from the Middle East and from Israel, and there's a lot of people coming together to cross these kind of cultural divides, particularly artistic people, and this is the kind of result. Wow. I have to put these two gentlemen in because they're actually very, very influential right now. And whilst I was preparing for this presentation, the Dalai Lama said this on Twitter. Do you follow the Dalai Lama? The Dalai Lama tweeted. So now I follow the Dalai Lama, and he said, "The more we feel concern for others and seek their well-being, the more friends we will have and the more welcome we will feel." And I really love that quote. The more we feel concern for others and seek their well-being, the more friends we will have, and the more welcome we will feel. That's really true for me as I travel around. And what I'm inviting you to do is go and engage with the creative class around the world, the people who want you to understand them. And I want you to do this. I want you to feel concerned for them and become engaged in who they really are. And you will feel less at loss, you know? You'll feel less confused. It'll be really good, I promise you. The world is made up of many, many, many stories. And one of the things that's happening to us right now is we're going through this extraordinary media transformation from the world of broadcast to the world of social media. And it's bigger than you think, and you already think it's big, right? It's bigger than you think. It's moving from what I would call a monistic media world, which is a single narrative world where a very small number of quite powerful people control the medium of storytelling, broadcast. And it's moving to a pluralistic world of many people and many stories. Television's expensive to produce, expensive to distribute, and expensive to consume. Everything I've showed you is cheap to produce, cheap to distribute, and cheap to consume. This is a fundamental change. And when you change the media and the way we tell stories, you actually really do change the world. That is what's going on right now. Many voices telling very complex stories that help you make sense of the world if, in fact, you decide to join in. So if you've all got Twitter accounts and you're not using them, you should use them. And you can share with the world what you had for breakfast. I don't care. Or you can share with the world a story that resonated with you, that you thought was really important to be seen in the world, and that's how our world gets changed, by the stories we tell each other. So join in. That's my invitation to you. Just join in. And I've come in 12 seconds shorter than my 18 minutes. Thank you.